Hi guys, and welcome to the Is It Worth It for the Type 64, the Tier 6 Chinese light tank, although technically it's Taiwanese. Yeah, there are lots of tanks that are in certain tech trees, and depending on your political views, they should or shouldn't be there. I mean, most recently the T-3485 Rudy was placed into the Russian tech tree, although technically it's a Polish tank. The Ram 2, it's a Canadian tank, but it's in the American tech tree. And then you've got the Type 64, which is a Taiwanese tank. It was designed and built in Taiwan, but it's part of the Chinese tech tree. I'm not going to get into the political side of things. I'm talking about a computer game, but it's in the Chinese tech tree, so if I'm going to be calling it a Chinese tank and it offends anyone, I apologize. I really do, but we're talking about a computer game here. So let's start with the history of the tank, and the Type 64 was designed and built in 1975. Yes, it's quite a modern tank compared to a lot of the tanks in World of Tanks, and it actually makes me older than the Type 64. The Type 64 is younger than I am. I'm feeling so old right now. But in 1975, the Taiwanese army decided that they needed to increase the number of light armored vehicles they had in service, and they embarked on not one but two projects side by side. One project resulted in this, the Type 64, and the other project resulted in this, the Type 64. So there were two tanks built, both called the Type 64. The other project was a complete Taiwanese rebuild of the M41 Walker Bulldog. They basically built it from the ground up from the M41 Walker Bulldog's plans. They modernized it, added modern equipment, but essentially it was 100% sourced and built in Taiwan. It was a Taiwanese Walker Bulldog, but it got the designation Type 64. The other Type 64 project that began at the same time resulted in this tank, and this is basically a tank that was built out of spare parts. The Taiwanese army had a lot of hulls left over. They had no spare turrets, but they had lots of hulls from the M42 Duster, an anti-aircraft vehicle. So they took surplus M42 Duster hulls, and they took surplus decommissioned Hellcat turrets. They mounted them on the tank. They also had a few, but not many, M1A2 76mm guns left over that were decommissioned. They put those back on the tanks, but they ended up having to build more. So a lot of the M1A2 guns used on the Type 64 were also built in Taiwan as well. But essentially, it's an anti-aircraft hull with a Hellcat turret and a Hellcat gun. Incidentally, the M1A2 is also the final gun you get in-game on the M10 Wolverine. It's the third gun available for the Hellcat of 4 guns in-game. But it's quite a good gun. But essentially, this Type 64 was built out of surplus and decommissioned parts. 50 were built, and only one of these tanks still exists today. So I usually like to compare premium tanks against their premium tank rivals, but the Type 64 has no rivals because it's the only Tier 6 premium tank in the game. So what I do in those occasions is then I will take a look at the regular tanks in-game, but there's a problem because I've only kept one regular Tier 6 light tank, the T-37 for the Americans. Now it's not that big a problem because I think of all the Tier 6 light tanks, and there are a lot of Tier 6 light tanks in the game, but I think of all of them, the two tanks that compare most favorably are these two, and I think it's no surprise that these are the only two Tier 6 light tanks I have in my garage, because I enjoy both of these tanks. They both play very, very similarly. Their stats are very, very similar, and as I say, I like playing both tanks. But there are lots of others. There's the AMX-12T, there's the T-21, the VK-2801, you've got the 5916, you've got the MT-25, and I've probably forgotten one or two, but of all the Tier 6 light tanks, these are the only two I liked enough to keep in my garage. But what I did before this review is I went into Tank Compare, compared all the light tanks in the game versus the Type 64, just so I would have it clear in my head as regards its stats. But overall, I think the Type 64 and the T-37 are the most closely matched, so you're not missing out on anything. But if you don't believe me, go to tankcompare.com and you can compare the Type 64 against any other Tier 6 light tank if you want to double double check. Starting with the hit points, it looks as if we have a negative already. 580 hit points compared to 680 on the T-37. However, as I say, before I began this review, I did go in and compared all the other Tier 6 light tanks against the Type 64, and I discovered that 580 hit points is actually okay. 680 hit points is very good. In fact, the T-37 gets the most hit points of any of the Tier 6 light tanks, but the average hit point pool for Tier 6 light tanks seems to be around 600. For example, the VK2801 gets 610 hit points, so slightly better than the Type 64. However, the MT25 only gets 570 hit points, slightly worse than the Type 64. 600 hit points seems to be about the average for Tier 6 light tanks. T-37 actually gets the most hit points, so this hit point difference actually looks a lot worse than it is in-game. As I say, Type 64, it's on the low side, but it does compare more favorably to the other Tier 6 light tanks in the game. Both of these two tanks weigh almost exactly the same. They come in at around 23.5 tons for me, and they both have a similar engine, a 500 horsepower engine, so the horsepower to weight ratio is similar for both of these tanks. They both accelerate well. However, for those of you who have driven the T-37, you know it's not a slow tank. It's got a 66 km/h top speed. It accelerates well, and it's quite maneuverable. It gets 48 degrees per second, but then you'll take a look at the Type 64. 72.4, 72.5 km/h top speed, 56 degrees per second traverse speed. So the acceleration, the top speed, and the traverse speed are better on the Type 64 than they are on the T-37. The Type 64 is a very fast, very maneuverable light tank. It's a lot of fun to play, and even though the T-37, I love the T-37, it's good, it's fast and it's maneuverable. The Type 64, it's noticeably better when you're playing it. However, it's not all good news, because even though it's got a faster hull traverse, faster top speed, it also has one of the worst turret traverse speeds of any of the light tanks at Tier 6 at 36 degrees per second. The T-37 has that well beaten at 44 degrees. 36 degrees per second is not good for a light tank, and that can give you sometimes a little bit of an issue when you're trying to circle an enemy tank to death. The turret traverse speed is not fantastic. It's okay, it's workable, but it's not as easy to do in the Type 64 as it might be in some other tanks. You've got to remember this is a Hellcat turret, and the turret traverse on a Hellcat isn't very good anyway. But 36 degrees per second is not bad, but for a light tank it's definitely could be a lot better on a light tank. The view range is very good. It's got the highest view range of any of the Tier 6 light tanks at 390. That's 5 meters further than the T-37, and the signal range is pretty good as well at 700 meters. Not as good as the T-37s, but it's still very good. So the stats for the tank are looking very good. We've got average hit points for a Tier 6 light tank, but it's very fast, very maneuverable, got great view range, got very good signal range. The turret traverse is a little bit on the low side, but it's workable. When it comes to armor, the armor is definitely on the low side for a Tier 6 light tank. It gets similar frontal armor of 25mm on the hull and turret as the T-37. T-37 also gets 25 on the hull, has slightly more armor on the turret, but yeah, Type 64 only has 12mm of armor on the sides, both turret and hull, 12 meters on the rear of the turret, and 19mm on the rear of the hull. So yeah, the armor is definitely worse on the Type 64 than it is on the T-37, but to put it into perspective, Tier 1s have absolutely no problems penning at Type 64, and the Type 64 is a light tank. It gets scout matchmaking. It will see Tier 7s, it will see Tier 8s, it will see Tier 9s. So the chances of actually bouncing anything or your tracks absorbing shots are basically just down to luck. It's RNG. There's nothing you can do to make the armor better on the tank. The only thing you can do is avoid being hit, because most of the guns that are going to be firing at you when you're driving a Type 64 are going to be able to overmatch your armor even if you try to angle it. So this tank has absolutely no armor. So let's take a look at this gun. It is the M1A2 76mm, and the T-37 also uses a 76mm, so we're going to be comparing these two guns very quickly. Basically, they're both 76mm, they both have exactly the same rate of fire. That means the DPM is identical on the T-37 as it is on the Type 64. However, the Type 64 gets more penetration, much more penetration. It gets 22 millimeters extra penetration, even though the alpha damage is the same. The T-37's gun is also more accurate, has better aim time, and weighs about the same. So essentially the gun on the T-37 is slightly better, but not by much, than the gun on the Type 64. However, I did mention the gun on the Type 64 is the gun that came on the Hellcat, because the Type 64 is a Hellcat turret. So we're just going to take a look at the Hellcat. We're going to take a look at the third gun, to get rid of that one. It's the third gun, M182, there we go, and we're going to see something similar as the T-37. You'll see the rate of fire is actually slightly better on the gun when it's on a Hellcat, but we get the same penetration, same alpha damage, but the Hellcat has much better accuracy using this gun. It also has much better aim time, and then for some unknown reason, the gun, even though it's the same gun on the Hellcat, weighs 3 times more than it does on the Type 64. So basically the Hellcat is a ton heavier if it decides to use exactly the same gun. So the gun may not be as good as it is on a Hellcat, or may not be as good as the gun on a T-37, but does that make it a bad gun? I don't think so. I think the rate of fire is very good. I think 18.18 shots a minute, very good. And when you combine that with 115 alpha damage, which doesn't seem like much, your DPM actually gets up to around 2,100. You can get it up to around 2,200 with equipment and crew skills. I think the DPM on the tank is absolutely amazing, providing you can hit and pen your target. Now, 128 millimeters of penetration is not very good. In fact, it's the worst penetration of any of the Tier 6 light tanks fully upgraded. However, the Type 64 is a fast, maneuverable tank, and you're going to be getting a lot of side shots, you're going to be getting a lot of rear shots if you are playing the tank correctly. And in those situations, 128 millimeters is usually just fine. I very rarely have to fire premium ammo unless I'm shooting at the front of enemy tanks, and even then the premium ammo is pretty good. It's got 177 millimeters of penetration. One thing I need to note is the premium ammo costs about 2,500 per shot, so the alpha damage is not high. If you're going to be shooting premium ammo in this tank, you're going to be making a loss. You're going to be losing money, because even if you hit and pen the enemy tank, you're not doing enough damage to make back the cost of the premium round. However, the Type 64's premium ammo is cheaper than it is on the Type 62, one tier higher, by about 1,500 credits. So it's actually cheaper to fire premium ammo on a Type 64 than it is on a Type 62. The accuracy of .4 is not great. In fact, it's pretty poor compared to most tanks. However, I don't notice an issue. I think the Type 64's accuracy is a lot better than .4. Now, bear in mind, I do have a very good crew in this tank. We'll come to crew in a moment, but I find the accuracy, especially when sniping with this gun, is actually a lot better than .4 would have you believe. The aim time is a little bit slow, but it's workable. It's just fine. 2.1 seconds aim time. That's very good on most tanks, but compared to the rate of fire of 18 rounds a minute, 2.1 could be a little bit better. So overall, I think the gun is actually pretty good on the Type 64. As I say, the penetration is low, but if you're playing the tank correctly, you're going to be getting side and rear shots, so the penetration is not going to matter so much. And while still on the subject of the gun, a couple of other things I forgot to mention. You get 45 rounds of ammunition in a Type 64. That seems quite a lot, 45 rounds. However, you've got a rate of fire of 18 rounds a minute. So that means you can pretty much shoot through your entire supply of ammunition if you're shooting constantly for 2.5 minutes. You will find yourself running out of ammunition in a Type 64 if you're playing a big role in a game and taking a lot of shots. It's very easy to run out of ammunition in this tank. It's very easy to get towards end game in a game and suddenly realize you've only got about 5 rounds left. That's why I only carry 1 HE shell. Yeah, you don't get a lot of ammunition, so got to remember to use it sparingly. Don't waste it on targets you know don't have much chance of penning. Use your APC or if you find yourself in that position. But you don't get a lot of ammunition, you need to conserve it. The other thing you need to know about the Type 64 is it gets 7 degrees of gun depression. So the gun depression is good but not fantastic. I've seen some people describe the gun depression on the Type 64 as excellent or amazing. It's not. 10 degrees is excellent, 10 degrees is amazing, and if they were looking at the stats for the other Type 64, the remake of the Bulldog, then yes, it's 10 degrees, and that is amazing, but it's not. This version is a Hellcat, it only has 7 degrees of gun depression. It's good, but it's not great, and sometimes when you're trying to fight on hills, you will find yourself exposing more of the tank than you thought you needed to. I think the gun depression on the tank is good. I don't think it's amazing, but it's definitely workable. So let's check out this gun and this speed and maneuverability in action. We are here on Live Oaks. I'm platooned with Ram. This is a game I played yesterday, one of 21 games I played for the review. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to pick up any ace tankers. I picked up about 9 first class badges. Didn't manage to pick up any ace tankers for this review, so you're just gonna have to do it first class badges. But it doesn't matter because it shows off the tank regardless. You can see the speed. I moved forward to intercept any enemy scouts, and we found a Chaffee. I'm trying to hunt him down, but I need to be careful, and I'm still kind of learning this area of the map since it was reworked. You saw me trying to take a shot on the move. Something I haven't mentioned, or I'm not going to be mentioning in the review, because this is some of the last footage I'm actually recording for the review. But a lot of reviews will say that the Type 64 is very, very good at shooting on the move, and it used to be a lot better, and then 9.6 happened, and there were a few tanks where I think shooting on the move has been affected, and the Type 64 is one of them. It used to be very good at shooting on the move. I don't think it's quite as good these days. It can still do a job, but it's definitely not as good as it used to be. I still don't think very many tanks can beat the T-71 for shooting on the move, but that's a tier higher, so it doesn't count. But anyway, was looking for the Chaffee, found him, and there we go. I was aiming, reversing, shot on the move, so that's the second shot on the move I've missed on the Chaffee. But he's been spotted, we know where he is, there are heavy tanks coming into town, Ram is asking for help, but I need to kill this Chaffee and then I can start working on the tanks in town. So there's a Easy 8 in the distance. Now his armor isn't very good. I missed my track shot, or at least I hit it. Didn't have the alpha damage to pen the Easy 8. It gets me spotted. And as I say, I'm quite surprised at how often I get spotted in this tank. Sometimes it's great, but some games you just get spotted again and again and again. But Chaffee is taking fire. I know he's going to be moving, so here we can see the rate of fire. One shot in, and we finish him off. Rate of fire is great, and you've got 0.4 accuracy. Now, as I say, the accuracy really doesn't feel like 0.4 on this tank. We go for a couple of shots in the distance at the Stura. No idea whether or not I hit him. But now that the Chaffee is dead, we can move up. There are 3 RT on the enemy team. But Ram has been asking for help, so I'm more interested in helping Ram than I am by going to kill the RT. At least not yet. And there's a T-34-1 moving up behind me, so spot an RT, swing around, and I decide I'll take a shot. Let's kill him. And we bounce. We bounce on the side of an M40, so miss my kill. Sometimes the penetration will let you down. You will find yourself bouncing on tanks. They're quite surprising. But anyway, we're moving up using gun depression, 7 degrees of gun depression, looking for shots. T-34, we get the side of a T-34. As you can see, we're firing regular AP. 2 shots in, I get spotted, and because there are still RT in play, I decide not to hang around for another shot. So our T-34-1 is moving in on RT. And I'm kind of still worried. You can see me glancing over to where the Stura Immel was. Still kind of wondering. I don't want to get one shot by the Stura. And I get spotted again, so I've got to move. But really, it's not about the scouting, it's not about the aggression. Just focus on how fast this tank is and the gun. Because this gun is supposed to have 0.4 accuracy. So we get a shot into the Stura, another one into the Stura. VK2801. So the gun is actually much, much better than the stats would have you believe. Now, I'm shooting under at very, very little here. Get one shot in. Don't know where that shot went, but aim carefully, trying to track the Stura. We get 2 more shots in. So we're up to 1300 damage. And I decide, you know what, I can go after that last remaining arty, or I can keep focusing on the tanks over here. So, trying to shoot under the railway tracks again. No joy. Okay, so here is the real strength of the T-34, or the T-64. There are 3 tanks down here. None of them are on a lot of health. The VK is a 3-hit kill for me. But the other 2 tanks I can either 1-hit or 2-hit. And I'm flanking, so I stayed out of their 50-meter auto-detect range, and you can see I'm doing 50, 60 kilometers along here. This is not favorable ground, but we're quick enough to be able to get around, flank, get behind the enemy tanks. And I haven't fired any premium yet, so Stura is a more dangerous tank, in my opinion, but we get 1 shot in, and again, not using bush mechanics very well, gets spotted. So T-29, Stura, both know I'm here. Enemy team are capping, by the way, so I've got to keep that in mind. So I need to kill these guys quickly, move up. T-34, T-29's waiting for me, so again, using standard AP, he's just fired. I can take my time, aim carefully, and more than enough penetration to go through the side of an American heavy tank. So I know the Stura is probably waiting for me, or he's coming for me. He's a 1-hit kill, so we move up, and we dupe him. He misses his shot, I put a shot into him. There's kill number 3. We're up to 1600 damage. We are capping, enemy team are capping, and really I could have just gone for enemy cap, but you could see, here we're going to see the speed. So even though the enemy team are capping, we've come up onto the railway lines, we're already doing 50 kilometers an hour. 60 kilometers an hour. Still increasing, we're up to 65. And we hit 70. So we're almost doing top speed here. 75 kilometers an hour. And we get back. So T-32, standard AP is going to go through the side. I switched to premium anyway because I want to basically make sure of the reset. So here's the problem. Miss the shot, 0.4 accuracy, not always perfect, bouncing on the front of a T-32. Now I've got plenty of hit points, so I sit there, take the hit, because I know that I'm going to be able to fire 4 shots in the time it takes him to reload. So we take him out. Now I forget I'm still on premium ammo. That's my fault, but I'll show you the end score results in a moment. We're still putting more shots in. You can see the rate of fire, you can see the accuracy. We're up to 2,200 damage. Get another shot in. He's a 2-shot kill. Track him in place again. And we go for the kill shot, and the shot goes high. Yeah, so sometimes the accuracy can let you down. But that replay was really just about the gun. I was able to penetrate most tanks I came across with my standard AP. Side and rear shots, the standard AP, even though it's only got 128mm of penetration, is just fine. Towards the end, I switched to premium ammo. It's one of the few games I played yesterday where I was firing premium ammo, just to show you that I needed it to go through the front of a T-32. But you can see that we finished top on XP with 1209. It wasn't an ace tanker, as I say, didn't pick up any ace tankers in my games yesterday. But came second on damage to a Borsig. So tier 6 light tank, Borsig came top on damage, but not by much. 4 kills and top on XP with 1209. Type 64, it's a very, very good tank, and as I say, it's a good moneymaker. So even though I fired, I think it was 6 or 7 premium rounds in that game, I still made a profit of 30,000 credits. If I hadn't been firing premium, that profit margin would have been much, much higher. The ammo costs and repair costs for this tank are very, very low. So let's talk about the crew. And the crew of the Type 64 is very, very balanced. It's got a commander, a gunner, a driver, a radio operator, and a loader. Does that make it a good crew trainer? Well, kind of. It's not perfect. And usually tanks with balanced crews are good crew trainers. It's a good crew trainer, but it's not perfect. And the reason is there are a lot of light tanks on the Japanese lines, but most of them don't have a similar crew layout. You've only got 2 crew members in Tier 1. You've got 3 crew members at tier 2. They can be trained up in a Type 64. You get the Chiha. You get 4 crew members. You're not training up your whole crew member yet, but you do, all your crew members, but you do get a radio operator. That's the first time you get a radio operator in the Chiha. You move on to the M5 Stuart, and we've got 4 crew members, including a radio operator, so we're still missing a loader. And then we move into medium tanks till we get to the 5916 at tier 6. And from the 5916 through the WZ131 and the WZ132 up to tier 8, you only have 4 crew members, so you're missing a radio operator. So you can train up the entire 5916, WZ131, WZ132 crew in a Type 64, but you're going to need an extra radio operator, and you should have an extra radio operator left over from the M5A1 Stuart, which is the last of the Chinese light tanks that uses a radio operator. But what it means, unfortunately, is that you end up, as you can see, I've got my WZ132 crew in here. You've got 4 crew members for the WZ132 in here, and I've got my old radio operator from the M5A1 Stuart because it was the only Chinese light tank radio operator I had left. It also means that while I was grinding up this crew, getting lots of XP, getting lots of skills, this guy was sat in the barracks till I got to the 5916, so he is way behind on skills, way behind on XP. Even though I've got Accelerate Crew Training on, he's still way behind. It's going to take him a long time to actually get up to the levels of the other crew members. So, yeah, it's not a perfect crew trainer, but you can train up all your, pretty much every single Chinese light tank in the Type 64. You're just going to have an issue with the radio operator. It's a minor issue, it's not a big issue, but it does mean it's going to take a long time to train up this guy, and in the meantime these guys aren't going to be earning as much XP as a result. But it's a decent crew trainer. It is going to give your crews a workout as long as I say, you have that extra radio operator. So let's talk about equipment, and there aren't too many equipment choices, thankfully, so we should fly through this. Toolbox is viable, but I don't recommend it. This tank doesn't get a lot of hit points. Most tanks you're going to be facing are going to be able to 2-hit kill you, and as a result, Toolbox usually is not going to be of a benefit. You get tracked and then you die pretty soon afterwards. However, if you're playing on a budget, you've got a spare equipment slot, you've got a spare toolbox, it's not going to do the tank any harm. Filling the tanks with CO2 is a complete waste of time. I played 21 games for this review. I was set on fire once, or at least once I remember. I don't think it's a big issue with the tank, so I think this is a waste of money. Enhanced gun laying drive is, again, up to you. I think there are better pieces of equipment. 2.1 second aim time for an 18 rounds per minute rate of fire is not good. However, it's workable, and because it's workable, I think there are better pieces of equipment. But if you are having issues with the aim time, enhanced gun laying drive would be fine. Coated optics is something I absolutely recommend on this tank, and I actually recommend them over the binocs because I tend to play this tank a lot more actively. I tend to do a lot more active scouting. I tend to do a lot more flanking, damage dealing. The tank is usually on the move, therefore I find coated optics better than binocs. A lot of the maps have changed. I don't do as much passive scouting as I did in the early days in this tank, so I found coated optics is much better. However, binocs are still viable. With coated optics I get 444 meters of view range. With binocs that would take me over 500, even though this is pretty close to the cap. It just depends on how you play the tank. If you play the tank more passively as a passive scout, then binocs would be better than coated optics, but as I say, I prefer to stay on the move. But I definitely recommend one or the other. You definitely need to boost the optics, even though the optics or the view range on the tank is very good in the first place. Medium caliber gun rammer, you get about 2080 DPM without equipment and crew skills. I'm using the gun rammer because, as I say, I use this as a flanker, I use it as a damage dealer. It gets my DPM up closer to about 2200 with the medium caliber gun rammer. So I just prefer the additional DPM, but if there was one piece of equipment you wanted to switch out, this might possibly be the one. If you prefer scouting over DPM, then this might be something that you don't or you prefer to remove. Enhanced torsion bars is possibility. This tank is extremely fast, and there are a couple of times I did actually track myself moving over terrain. Improving the suspension of the tank is viable. It depends on how aggressively you decide to play it. If you find yourself going over hills and tracking yourself a lot, then you've got two choices. One is you can learn to stop doing it, which is sometimes hard, or you can put enhanced torsion bars on the tank. It's viable. It's completely up to you. Wet ammo rack is something I don't think is viable. Even if you do get ammo racked in this tank, as I say, if you're getting shot at and hit, you're probably going to die pretty quickly. 18 rounds a minute, even if you do get ammo racked, I think the rate of fire is still pretty good on the tank. I think there are better pieces of equipment. Camo net is an absolute 100% must on this tank. The camo rating, it's a light tank. It's got good camo rating to begin with, but it's actually quite a big light tank. It's smaller than the T-37, but it's still bigger than most other tier 6 light tanks. So to enhance your camo rating, I do recommend a camo net. There are occasions where you're going to be sitting in bushes. There are occasions where you're going to be sitting still. Camo net's just going to help the camo rating on the tank. Light spall liner, complete waste of time on this tank. Basically, HE is going to completely mess you up. You've only got 12 millimeters of side and rear armor. So yeah, don't recommend the spall liner, but that's pretty much for it for equipment. I went for, just to reiterate, the gun rammer, coated optics, and a camo net. But as I say, there are some other viable pieces. Okay folks, time for the overview game, a game where I show you as many strengths and weaknesses of whatever tank I'm reviewing in one replay. Now this is one of the few games I played for the review. I played, I think it was 21 games, and almost every single game was a city map or was a choke point map, so I got very little opportunity to do any scouting. So when this map popped up, it's a tier 8 game here on Redshire, I was very happy. But there we go. Sometimes, even though the tank is quick, moved up into a scouting position, I got spotted. So we can see that the accuracy can be quite good, the rate of fire can be quite good, the alpha damage is quite low, and shooting on the move, definitely not as good as it used to be since 9.6. But I've been spotted, the enemy team know I'm here, but this is one of the few games where I actually did try to do some scouting, or had the opportunity to do some scouting. So I moved forward and we've spotted an SU-152, we're spotting a Tiger. There's a Sherman Jumbo down here, but I wait, shoot, double bush this guy. Should be safe. These guys are all behind cover. We're able to go through the side of an Easy 8, and unfortunately second shot gets me spotted because there's a VK2801 behind me. So at this point I realize, okay, we've only got an AMX 5100 over here. Really? I should be getting out of here. I need to run. There's an IS, enemy team have moved up. I've got to run. So I know that there's still I'm keeping the rocks between potential shots of myself, but we've got to get out of here. You can see the acceleration is good. We're already up to 75 kilometers an hour, and we are running with our tail between our legs because there's no way I can hold back all those tanks on the other flank. So we lost an LTB. Our AMX 5100 is running for it, and I'm going to be moving over towards the hill. So LTB in the distance. Again, this tank, again, a lot of reviews say it's good at shooting on the move, but a lot of those reviews are prior to 9.6. Again, shot missed on the move. Oh, VK, I've got a shot, and unfortunately someone else takes him out before I'm able to do any damage. So really, I've done a little bit of spotting. We've just killed 3 enemy tanks. The game is actually looking quite comfortable. I'm on 400 damage, but you're getting to see the speed, the maneuverability. I love tanks that you can move into position, you can run away, get out of position if you need to. Keeping your tank alive, keeping it in the game, much more important than dying a hero's death trying to defend a flank alone. So now I'm just looking for breaks in the enemy line, and this is why I love light tanks, and this is why I love the Type 64. It's just so fast, you can exploit breaks, you can just move up to one area, looking for tanks. SU-100Y, spotted him, but there's a T-71 that hasn't been spotted. There's an SU-101 that hasn't been spotted. There's RT in play, and I really don't want to engage the SU-101Y or 101Y. Not yet. But we're still on standard AP. Here we go. Now, if you know weak spots, you can aim at the turret, and there you go. 128 millimeters of penetration, more than enough to go through the turret in a Tiger P. So, the tank gets criticized for its lack of penetration, but usually if you know what you're doing, penetration's not an issue. Now, I decide to go for it. T-71, SU-101 haven't been spotted. That's who I'm going to hunt. I reckon that if I went for the SU-100Y, there'd be nothing left before I got there. But this is all about the maneuverability. It's all about the view range. And I'm just able to maneuver around. This is a big map. I'm able to get around it so quickly. So, no Artie. That's quite surprised in the usual spot. T-71 finally got spotted. He's been sitting in that bush since the beginning of the game. And he hasn't moved. But we're moving in. This game is a foregone conclusion. So just looking for Artie, SU-101. And again, shooting on the move. As I say, this tank really isn't that good at shooting on the move. But we find one Artie, we found the other Artie, take a quick glance, see whether or not he's aiming at me. He's not. So we're just going to circle this Lorraine. And there we go. So, shot didn't land near me. I took some splash damage. This tank is very, very susceptible to HE. But thankfully, he missed me. Now, we can pen the rear of this 101. What I decide to do is I decide to track him. And as you can see, I can't actually do damage through the side. So the penetration, even though I tracked him, and I get some assistance damage out of it, the penetration going through some tanks is a pain. It really does hurt the tank now and again. Just because he was at a slight angle, couldn't penetrate, couldn't track him. But the rate of fire means we are now up to 1344. Now, as I say, that last kill was a little bit cheap, but as I say, I wanted just to show you the difference in penetration. Could pen the rear, couldn't pen the front or the side. And again, look at that, 2 shots on the move on the T-71. Misses. And we finally get him. So, yeah, I think a lot of reviews are a little bit out of date. Tank definitely isn't as good at shooting on the move as it used to be. Now, I'm already on, I'm up to 1400 damage. I'm on 4 kills, and this Tiger 1, because I've conserved my hit points, I can move in. Now, I can take a shot, but I failed to pen the Tiger 1. And because I've taken 1 shot, now, all of a sudden, I can't be too aggressive. I've just lost half my hit points in 1 shot. This tank does not get hit points, or it does not get a lot of hit points, so... again, we put 1 shot into the Tiger, bounce, the second shot goes in. Sometimes the penetration does hurt you. You're not always going to get side and rear shots, and yeah, not a lot of hit points to play around with. So once again, you got to see the speed and maneuverability of the Type 64, being able to get into position early in the game in one of the few games I actually got to do any scouting yesterday. But we got some spots, we got some assistance damage, we got enemy Chaffee taken out, we got spotted in return because sometimes the Type 64 just likes getting spotted. It's a big light tank. But we had the speed to be able to get out of that position, to be able to run away, and that's really important in a tank. When it looked as if we were being overrun, when it was 5 versus 2, I was able to run away, and with all my hit points, we were able to relocate, move to the other flank, we were able to do some spotting along ridges, we were able to hunt down Artie. It's a great tank towards the end of games, hunting down enemy tanks. We were able to take out Artie. You got to see how inefficient the gun is now and again. Just a slight change in angle and the gun can't penetrate. 200 or 128 millimeters of penetration. It's good when you're shooting sides and rear, but when enemy tanks actually do manage to angle, unfortunately sometimes the penetration will let you down. You got to see how few hit points I had. I only took 1 major hit in that game. It was from a Tiger, and half my hit points were gone. So you've really got to conserve your hit points in this tank and keep it for endgame. But once again, we finished top on XP with 1168, 1546 damage. So not as much damage as the first game, or as many kills, or even as much XP. But again, I think it showed you how good this tank can be, but also how the gun can sometimes be a little bit frustrating. And the other reason I liked this game was because I didn't have to fire any premium ammo in this one, and you could see the huge change in my profit margin compared to the first game. We fired similar amounts of ammunition, but you could see that the repair costs, the ammo costs, because I wasn't firing any premium ammo, were tiny, very, very cheap to run this tank. And because we didn't fire any premium ammo, we earned 58,000 credits with a premium account. So it's a very good moneymaker if you're not firing premium. It's a good crew trainer, and it's just a great tank. It's a lot of fun to play. I love how flexible it is. It's a really good tank to learn how to scout in. Okay, folks, time to sum up. Is the Type 64 worth 3,500 gold? Well, it's a really, really good tank. It's got a lot of great features. It's got a lot of positives. It's incredibly fast. It's incredibly maneuverable. 72.5 kilometers an hour top speed, 56 degrees per second reverse speed. It's fast, it's maneuverable, and it's fun. It's fun to play, at least for me. Definitely one of the biggest selling points of the tank. I think the DPM on the tank is amazing. You can get up to 2,200 DPM for me with a good crew and equipment. I think the view range is amazing. It's got the best joint view range of any tier 6 light tank in the game, and it can be buffed. I think the signal range is very, very good. It's a light tank, so it keeps its camo rating on the move. And I mean, the gun depression is not a big positive, but 7 degrees of gun depression on the tank is still pretty good. And the crew training, or as a crew trainer, it's again not a big positive, but it is a positive. Basically, you could train up every single Chinese light tank crew in the game in this particular tank. However, because you do need a radio operator that you don't need on later Chinese light tanks, it means that you're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of XP being poured into this guy to try and get him up to the level of your other crew members. So it's a very good crew trainer, but it could be better. And it's a money earner. You will make credits in this tank. So if you like light tanks and you like light tank gameplay, fast, maneuverable, frantic gameplay, then I really, really do recommend the Type 64. However, the tank is not without its problems. Unfortunately, like a lot of other light tanks at tier 6, you only get 580 hit points. Now, it's a little bit on the low side. Most of the other tanks around tier 6 get 600 hit points, but it means you can be one hit killed. You can be two hit killed. Yesterday during my games for the review, I got one hit killed by Borsigs, one hit killed by ISU-152s, one hit killed by SU-152s, one hit killed by Arty. Just once. Most of the time Arty had problems hitting me. But you will get one hit killed, and if you don't get one hit killed, you'll get two hit killed. I got two hit killed by a T-34 yesterday, two hit killed by a T-32 yesterday. So you don't get a lot of hit points. You don't want to get shot in this tank in the first place. The armor is absolutely dreadful, which is another reason you don't want to get shot. It's a light tank. It's got no armor. You can't count on it, and if you do bounce anything, you're extremely lucky. It's definitely a negative for the tank. The turret traverse speed is not great. Unfortunately, sometimes you're going to have problems when you're trying to circle enemy tanks to death. It's workable, but it's just not as easy in this tank as it would be in, for example, a T-37 with a faster turret traverse speed. As I say, it's workable, but it's definitely a negative for the tank. Also, you don't carry a lot of ammunition. If you are fighting a big game, there are lots of tanks on the enemy team, you're firing a lot of ammunition, you're going to find yourself running out of ammunition very, very quickly. So you got to preserve your shots. You got to count on just taking shots you know are going to hit, or you know are going to do damage. And you also have pretty poor penetration. You've only got 128 millimeters of penetration with this gun, so you can't really take on tanks head to head. But if you are taking enemy tanks on head to head, you're probably not doing it right. This tank is for flanking. This tank is for getting to the sides and rear of enemy vehicles, in which case I find the penetration doesn't matter as much, but yeah, 128 is definitely a negative for the tank. Another negative for the tank is sometimes you get unexpectedly spotted, even though the camo rating on the tank is very good. What you got to remember about the Type 64 is it's quite big, it's actually quite wide, and it's quite tall. It's smaller than the T6 or T-37, but compared to a lot of the other tier 6 light tanks, it's actually bigger. That means when you're trying to use bush mechanics, sometimes the bush is just not big enough to hide behind. You end up exposing part of your tank, and as a result, you get spotted unexpectedly. So I tend not to run into that problem too much. It does happen on occasion, but I usually play the tank actively rather than passively. But just be aware, it is quite a big light tank. It is quite a big target for a light tank, and as a result, sometimes you'll find yourself getting spotted even though the camo rating is quite good. So I think it's fair to say I really, really like the Type 64. It's one of my favorite premium tanks in the game. And yes, I'm going to recommend it. Yes, I'm going to say it's worth it, but more than just for the strengths and weaknesses I've pointed out, I love the Type 64 for another couple of reasons. One reason is that this tank is competitive. It's a premium tank, but it's competitive. And normally premium tanks aren't competitive. Competitive premium tanks are quite rare, and they're very, very popular. And I think the Type 64 is competitive. It's as good as most other Tier 6 light tanks. In fact, there's a reason why I sold most of my Tier 6 light tanks, but still have the T-37 and the Type 64. These two tanks are very, very similar. I get very, very similar gameplay experience out of them, and very, very similar results. I love the Type 64, and I would rather play it than any of the other light tanks I sold. It's competitive, even though it gets, you know, worse gun depression, I think, or worse gun penetration, I should say. Because of the style of play, the gun penetration really doesn't matter as much on the tank. It doesn't bother me very much on the Type 64. So it's competitive. So I have fun playing it, and I don't feel underpowered. I can train my crews, I can earn credits in this tank, and have fun while doing it. Another reason I really, really like the Type 64 is platooning, and this is just from my own experience. When it comes to premium tanks, a lot of players buy their first premium tank or their first Tier 8 premium tank because maybe they've come to the game and they've got friends who are already playing, and those friends are already playing high tiers, they're playing low tier tanks, and they want to be able to platoon with friends, so they buy a Tier 8 premium tank. That's why I bought a Super Pershing, even though I had about 1,000 games played in World of Tanks at the time, because I wanted to platoon with people I knew who were playing the game. So you find a lot of players going straight into the game, not learning how to play, not learning the mechanics, going straight into higher tier games after buying a Tier 8 premium tank because they want to platoon with friends. I bought the Super Pershing because it happened to be the cheapest Tier 8 premium tank you could buy. That's the only reason I bought it. But the alternative to that is the Type 64. This is a very, very cheap tank compared to a Tier 8 premium tank. And because of it's a light tank, and because it gets higher tier matchmaking, you can platoon up with your Tier 7, Tier 8, Tier 9 buddies in a Type 64 and still be able to make an impact on the game. And even though an inexperienced player driving this tank may not get the results or may not do really well in the tank, it's not going to hurt your teammates as much either. If you're in a Tier 8 premium tank and are a new player and you're top tier, I think it would hurt the team a lot more than if you were driving a Type 64, you were bottom tier in the game and you died very, very early in the game. So I think it's a very, very good tank and I don't recommend ever buying a premium tank to play higher tier games without learning how to play first, even though I made that mistake. But if you absolutely want to platoon with friends who are already playing World of Tanks, I think the Type 64 would be a very good purchase compared to spending a lot of money on a Tier 8 premium tank. Another reason I can recommend the Type 64 is because of my platoon mate Bringy. You see, I've always said that the Type 64 was competitive. Now, Bringy, my regular platoon mate, he didn't play light tanks. He mainly focused on medium tanks until the personal missions came along, and then he had to play light tanks. But rather than grinding up the light tank lines trying to get good light tanks, what he actually did was he just went and bought a Type 64, and he's managed to complete most of the light tank missions using a Type 64 because the tank is competitive. I think it's very, very good. And yes, occasionally you're going to run into an autoloader who's going to absolutely tear you apart. Or yes, sometimes you're going to get caught out of position, you're going to get 1 or 2 shot killed. But in the main, I think this tank can do everything. I think this tank can passive scout, I think it can active scout, I think it can damage deal when it needs to, and I think it's a very, very good tank to learn how to play light tanks in. If you like playing light tanks, or if you want to learn how to play light tanks, then I cannot recommend this tank enough. 3,500 gold, is it worth it? Absolutely yes. Pound for pound, or rather than in this case, ton for ton, I think the Type 64 is the best value premium tank in the game. Don't think it's the best one, but I think it's pretty close to it. It's definitely one of my favorite premium tanks in the game. If you don't have a Type 64, put it on your wish list or go out and buy one now. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.